Welcome, folks. So I've been gone for a few days. We've been experiencing some things down here, between the hurricane. I got a little swamped with work. So I'm back today. We're going to take a break from our Irish Wars series, though. I decided, after a week off, I'm still recovering from everything. I wanted to do some reviews. We haven't done any reviews in a long time. I thought this would be fun. So I decided I'm going to pick two of my favorite channels. That's going to be, one of my favorite channels, two videos from them. We're going to do Guy Fawkes versus Che Guevara and Theodore Roosevelt versus Winston Churchill on Epic Rap Battles of History. Now, before we get into it, I just want to invite you all to please like and subscribe to the channel, History with Tim. I love the interactions we've been having. It's been such a great time, and I just want to keep our community growing. So thank you so much, and let's get into it. Alright, so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to let each person do their own verse, and I'll pause it before the next verse. I'm going to write down facts I see in the song, and then when I pause it, I'll go through each one of the facts that were discussed. So here we go with Guy Fawkes versus Che Guevara.
Guy Fawkes. Gave out of the terror, fresh kangaroo, ill rhyme slayer from the 60s era, revolting, heavy metal rebel blood spiller. Me and my gorillas are a squad of killers, known worldwide for my steely-eyed look. You're famous cause of Alan Moore's third best book, and all the children say we will be like Che. Asthmatic, but I'll take your breath away. You tried to rebel against James the First. Here's a tip for your next plot. Try to rehearse. I got my face on a magnet on your roommate's fridge. Your head is on a spike up on London Bridge. You had one job, cabron, to strike a matchstick. Got caught with the fuse like your boss. Not lit. You should have stayed anonymous, epic fail guy. Treat this battle like the gallows and take another dive. As a communist,
Ooh, I was a little slow there. Alright, so there was a lot in that. A lot that I actually realized. So one of the first things he discussed is 60s era. He was a guerrilla warrior. So the way they took over Cuba, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro and all them, it was very similar to the way that Mao Zedong took over China, and very different from the way, say, Lenin took over Russia. What they did was they relied on the countryside. They hid in the hills, they hid in the deep jungles of Cuba, and that's how they took over. They mention how he was asthmatic. Che was actually very asthmatic, which is kind of ironic because, you always think about him smoking cigars and everything. But he did fight through it in his elder days, and he was able to, rise up to prominence in the socialist movements of the 60s and 70s. That's why, you have all these people that look up to him and everything. He then mentions Alan Moore. Alan Moore is the writer of the V for Vendetta comic books. It was actually made into a movie starring Hugo Weaving and Natalie Portman? Yes, Natalie Portman. John Hurt actually plays the villain in that, who's the Chancellor. Is it Grand Chancellor? Something weird like that. But it pretty much uses Guy Fawkes as a symbol of opposition to a fascistic system of government, and he's the one that is chosen. The whole thing about Guy Fawkes that a lot of people watching this they should know about a little bit, but you probably don't. Guy Fawkes was a Catholic extremist in 1600s, James the First, yeah. Probably, I would call it 17th century England. This is right after Henry and the Protestant Reformation. James the First is actually Scottish. James the First is James the Fourth of Scotland. So he, because when Elizabeth the First died, she had no heirs. So they had to go to her next of kin, which was Mary Queen of Scots, because her father was Henry the Eighth's sister. Her mother was. So James the First was the next of kin. So he became the king of two kingdoms. So that's why he's often called James the First of England and Fourth of Scotland. He's the House of Stuart, which is also rooted to the House of the Bruce, Robert the Bruce. But he was the king at the time, and at the time period, he was actually enforcing much more drastic laws against Catholics because his cabinet had believed Catholics were becoming a little cocky and that they still had not given into the Reformation. And that's what created groups like Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot, led by Robert Catesby. Good reference for Catesby. There's a series called Gunpowder Plot through HBO. Would strongly recommend to see it. It's a great series. It discusses the whole plot. You know, of course, it's going to have its historical inaccuracies. But Kit Harington, the person who plays Jon Snow, he actually plays Catesby, and he's actually Catesby's, I believe, great-great-grandson. So it's kind of cool that he got to go back and play his relation, who was the leader of the Gunpowder Plot. And then he talks about London Bridge. He a part of what happened when you were drawn and quartered, and your head would get cut off. This happened to William Wallace. This happened to many others. It kind of happened to Blackbeard a little bit. Not really. Instead of bringing him to London Bridge, they hung his head from the ship they had captured. But during Guy Fawkes' execution, which was drawn and quartering, the way it usually worked was you would hang someone. And once you hang them, you're not hanging to kill them. You're hanging to make them almost die. The whole point is to make the person suffer. So they were hanging about 4 or 5 individuals while this was going on. And Guy Fawkes was in the middle. And while they were hanging one of the other individuals, Guy was standing on a ladder. And he pretty much said, "I'm going out on my terms." And he jumped and killed himself. So he was the only one who was not actually as tortured as the others, which he was tortured. We'll get into that in another verse. But he was actually the only one who escaped the draw and quartering. So, that was a lot of good ones they put in there. A lot of facts in a very short amount of time. Now let's see what Guy Fawkes has to do.
It must really hurt that your face has been cheapened, weakened, besmirched, being plastered on posters, coasters, and shirts, making capitalists rich off of you on merch. Right, I'm a pious man and I fight for the Lord. I would cut you, but I don't want your sweat on my sword. I was tortured until I could hardly sign my name, and listening to you felt pretty much the same. Ooh, face it, Ernesto, you're Castro, but less so. He's Cuba commander, you're more of the Destro. Revolt all you want, I don't give two Guy Fawkes. But look at Venezuela, what you're fighting for sucks.
Okay, that's another good one. So, of course, the first one to mention is how he, who is the symbol of socialism, especially in today's day and age, you know, the Che Guevara shirts, posters, all those things, someone's making money off of all of those. So it's true that, you know, he was this symbol of socialism and communism and this and that, but right now businesses are making money off his likeness. So that's a good one. Also, it talks about how Guy Fawkes is a pious man. Guy Fawkes actually did not recognize kings before God. So one of his big things, he was a very mysterious character, Guy Fawkes. Not a lot is known about him, but it was known from what is known, he was a very strong believer that God's will came before the king's will. Now, in Protestant Reformation England or Dutch Netherlands and things like this, where, you know, this was very, very taboo to discuss. You know, this was, the king comes first. The king's the head of the Church of England. The king talks to God the same way the Pope does. But in the eyes of someone like Guy, that's not what it was. It was God comes first, which in itself is kind of radical even for the Catholic Church, but that's how he was. And then they bring up the fact that he was unable to sign his name. This is true. When he was captured, he was brought to Salisbury, Cecil Salisbury. He was the, I guess, spy master is what the name would be. I called it Master of Whispers, but that's very Game of Thrones-ish. But he was the spy master for James I. He's actually the one who led to the agreement between Spain and England to, like, end the fighting. They'd been fighting for years. He had Guy tortured so bad that by the time he finally fessed up and confessed about him and his conspirators, he physically was unable to sign his own name. So one of the soldiers actually had to hold his wrist while he like struggled to write his name down. So that's kind of a haunting picture in your head about this guy who, he was. It just shows you the difference between today and back then. And then the line, Castro your leso, I believe is what he said. Like I said before, Castro was the leader. Like, yes, of course Guy Fawkes was there. Guy Fawkes is kind of, not Guy Fawkes, Che Guevara was of course there. Che has become, again, this martyr syndrome, I call it. It's like people like Stonewall Jackson. It's like just because they died, I think we make them bigger than they truly are. So, the reality was, a lot of what happened in Cuba was because of Castro, and Che was kind of on the second side, was the left-hand man. Not even right, because if you would have asked Castro, he would have said his brother Raul was his right-hand man. So, and this is also what pretty much caused a rift between Che and Castro, because Che believed he was more important, and when Che was actually caught and by guerrillas in another South American country, he tried to use himself as a ransom tool. He's like, oh, but people will pay millions for me, and they didn't really care, and that's why they killed him. But that's a great line. And then of course he shoots at Venezuela. Venezuela is what, in the early 2000s, a lot of socialists in America pointed to as the perfect example of socialism. This is how it's supposed to be. This is what it looks like. But the reality is, and again, we're not a political channel. I'm not taking the political ideology. I'm not taking economic ideology. I'm just explaining what usually happens. Because in America, if you have a commune, they usually work. A commune, a very small group of people working together, living together. I call it the Smurfs. That will work. That can work because it's a community. You're tight knit. You're everything. It's when you do it on a large scale is where it becomes a problem. Because, especially in the United States, we just had our midterm elections. You can see how different areas need different things. So just because you're in a city doesn't mean you're going to get along with someone in the suburbs. And just because you're in the suburbs doesn't mean you're going to get along with someone in the countryside. So when Venezuela, at first everything was great. Hugo Chavez, the man who started the socialist state of Venezuela, they loved him. They thought he was a great guy. Sean Penn was famous. He went down there, hung out with Chavez. But then as time began to progress, things started falling apart. I call it putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Yeah, at first, oh yeah, I'm fine, but then that blood is going to come out. And that is what happened with Venezuela. So, again, very good. I'm kind of liking Guy a little better, personally. I think he's doing a lot better than Che, but, let's see if they can, in the rebuttals, how they'll do.
Tux, Guy, you died for the Catholics. A group with a bad touching little boys habit. And this porn star pilgrim look. What's up with that? It's more like me, but very bad at. Oh, what's the fuck say now? When they cut your junk out. I'm the hardest Marxist ever graced a banknote. You're an error-prone terrorist, penny for the scapegoat.
Don't try to boast about your banknotes with Guido. You muddled your...
Sorry, they move so quick. Alright, so clearly the first one, you died fighting for the Catholics. Again, like I said, Guy was a very loyal Catholic. He believed in, the Catholic faith and everything. But what, this is a taboo subject. What he points to is an incident that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, when some, let's just say, men of the cloth in Boston, in the United States, were caught doing some illicit things with children. Again, you can't do everyone in that way. You can't view all priests and things like that way, but that was something that did happen. And then he talks about V for Very Bad Hat. That, again, is another reference to Alan Moore's graphic novel, V for Vendetta. Again, Guy Fawkes is kind of a cultural symbol he's become a cultural symbol for opposition to tyranny. But a little bit of a reality people don't realize about Guy Fawkes, he was actually looking for a religious oligarchy to pretty much take over. He wanted the Catholic Church to take over England. So it's a little bit of ironic that he's the symbol for anti-tyranny, where he was the one who was actually kind of looking for a more brutal regime to come in right after. And then finally, he talks about, losing his junk. I'm not trying to laugh at this, but one of the parts of drawing and quartering was they would, for men, because women were drawn and quartered too, but men would have their genitals cut off and shown to the crowd. It's just a reality of the time. It was part of the humiliation of the drawing and quartering. Another thing he mentions is how he's on a banknote. Che is on banknotes in South American countries. As much as, I might have criticized him a little bit on here and pointed out, what his influence was compared to someone like Fidel or Raul Castro, he did have an effect on socialist movements in South America. So he is on the banknotes of some countries. I believe he's actually on the banknotes of Venezuela. Him and Hugo Chavez, I believe. But now we're going to get into, I believe, Guy. So here we go.
Economy like mint in a mojito. This very battle disproves your communist initiative. These rhyme skills are not evenly distributed. I'm Catholic, I've got mass when I'm rapping. You're an upchain, that's Bay of Pigs Latin. After what just happened, you should retire. Is it the 5th of November? Cause I'm on fire!
Alright, that was good. So, let's finish that off. So, Guido, your mojito. Guido's actually one of the names that Guy Fawkes went by. I believe he actually signed his confession as Guido Fawkes. This was because he was serving in Spanish Netherlands. At the time period this is going on, there's this whole contention over places like Naples and the Netherlands and Belgian areas. The Spanish declared it was their land. The French declared Naples was theirs. The English were like, no, we want the Dutch Protestants here, and there was this whole thing. So Guy actually went to Spain, and he was serving them. So that's where the name Guido Fawkes comes from. But also, we talked to his Catholicism. That's where a lot of the British Catholics were. They were in the Netherlands. So I think his name was Sir Stanley. He was kind of the leader of the Catholic British in exile. If you know what the Huguenots were Protestant French who fled to the German states. So this is kind of the same thing, but it's the Catholics fleeing to the Netherlands. And I don't mean to laugh at this because I actually have a family friend who his godfather is actually Batista, the former leader of Cuba. The Bay of Pigs Latin, that's in reference to, obviously, the attack of the Bay of Pigs when the free Cubans attempted to retake Cuba from Castro. It failed miserably. A lot of the things the Cubans were promised were not delivered. So that's why in America you'll see a lot of older Cubans are very anti-democrat, because many of them blame John F. Kennedy, who was the president at the time, for the failure of the Bay of Pigs, because they believe they were promised things that never came. So that's where that reference comes from. And then finally, the I'm on fire part. That's another cool thing, I do have family that lives in England, ironically. I know I was an Irish Catholic, that's weird, but they're actually Irish Catholics too. Guy Fawkes Day, it actually just passed, I believe, 10 days ago. It's the day in which they celebrate his death. He was caught, he was hung, but what they do, it actually doesn't celebrate his death because it's on the 5th of November. The 5th was when they caught him trying to blow up the dual houses of Parliament, the King, Queen, and Prince of Wales. So interesting. Sorry, I was reading the comment. So what they do, it's kind of like their 4th of July in England. What they do is they have a big firework display, and they burn effigies of Guy Fawkes. So that's why when he's like, is it the 5th of November because I'm on fire? It's because on Guy Fawkes Day, November the 5th, they actually burn effigies of him across England. So I'm going to be honest, I think Guy won, personally, and that's not me being biased. I think he just brought more substance, whereas I think Che was kind of just shooting shots at him. So that's my opinion. Comment if you disagree. I'm more up to the fun little debates. So now we're going to move on to Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt, two of, if not the most interesting characters from world history. Okay, so instead of doing Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt today, we're going to do it tomorrow. This video went far longer than I was expecting, so my apologies for that, but please like, share, and comment. I always love to have the interactions, especially with a subject like this, because I definitely know people are going to have different opinions on me on who won this one. So tomorrow we're going to cover that one. I'm going to actually continue doing more of these videos, so if you want to see more, please be sure you subscribe and join our growing community. I have no problem doing these videos. I love doing them. But also for those of you to know, I do not get anything from these videos. All the everything goes back to the monetization goes back to Epic Rap Battles of History and Nicepeter and Epic Lloyd. So I also going to leave their link to not only the video but the channel in the description below. Please go over and watch the video there as well. You can watch it fully through without my commentary. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, please subscribe to the channel. We love the growth. And I'll see you in the next one with Winston Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt. Thanks, and I'll see you there.